Today's video is brought to you by CuriosityStream, smart TV for your smart TV. Right now, using the link in the description and the code EckhartsLadder, 1 year of CuriosityStream costs just $14.99. With that subscription to CuriosityStream, you get thousands of streamable documentaries and non-fiction TV shows on topics like history, nature, science, food, technology, travel, and more. CuriosityStream really is the Netflix for nerds, the Hulu for history buffs, and the Disney Plus for the scientist, with 35 collections of curated programs handpicked by their experts, award-winning exclusives and originals, and much, much more. So if you want to spend your time productively and learn while sitting in front of the screen, you can try out CuriosityStream, as I said, for 1 year for just $14.99 by following the link down in the description and using the code EckhartsLadder. Thank you so much to CuriosityStream for sponsoring today's content. Now, on with the video. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. I know this intro section has gone a little bit long with the sponsored section, but I do want to announce that I've retooled the EckhartsLadder Patreon. There will be lots of new rewards even for lower tier members, including exclusive videos and guaranteed responses from my now monthly Q&A sessions. I will note it's almost the end of the month, so if you do sign up today, message me and I can refund this month's fee for you so you don't have to pay again in a couple of days. So, what if Anakin and Master Chief swapped places, or at least Anakin stepped in for the events of Halo CE? How far could the Jedi Knight get? Could he survive the game? And if not, where would he end up dying? That'll be the topic of discussion for today. So we're taking Anakin Skywalker at his prime before his transformation into Darth Vader. He's got access to all of his ordinary Jedi equipment. He will also get a Cortana chip, which he can use, and he's got an understanding of Covenant technology, so if he needs to steal a vehicle like Chief, then he can. Anakin will just generally also have the same knowledge of Master Chief outside of Covenant technology. He can command Marines, he understands how UNSC weapons work, but of course he will also maintain all of his force powers from his ordinary Jedi life. So let's do a comparison of the characters very briefly before we actually talk about the story and the hurdles that Anakin will be facing. The biggest difference between Anakin and Chief is where their strength comes from. Master Chief is of course equipped in a state-of-the-art combat suit, his Mjolnir suit, and he relies on that alongside his incredible training, reflexes, strength, speed, and weaponry to defeat the Covenant and of course the Flood. Anakin couldn't be much more different. His outfit and armor is really just something secondary. He doesn't intend on getting shot, and he usually doesn't. He's armed, of course, with his lightsaber, which should be pretty effective against Covenant plasma weaponry. And of course, while Anakin doesn't have the same strength or even reflexes as Master Chief, he's augmented by the Force. A lot of people talk about Jedi abilities and Jedi reaction time, but really that's doing a disservice to their potential. Jedi don't, say, deflect blaster bolts because they have incredible reflexes, rather because they have precognition. The Force guides their hand, they know where the blaster bolts will be before they're even there, and that goes for a lot of things when the Jedi are in tune with the Force. Of course, Anakin is an incredibly competent fighter. The Force guides his actions. He can lash out with not only his lightsaber, but with a variety of Force moves, Force choke, when he's angry, push, pull, telekinesis, pretty much anything that he can imagine. As the Chosen One and at his prime during the end of the Clone Wars, Anakin is arguably the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, if not throughout most of existence. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the events of Halo, especially the early levels, how Anakin would face off against the Covenant. There are a few things that work in his advantage. First of all, in Halo 1 especially, almost every encounter with the Covenant is in relatively small groups. You don't usually encounter more than, say, 10 or 15 Covenant at once. That works out very well for a Jedi. It should help Anakin stop from being overwhelmed, and thankfully I think his lightsaber should work fairly well against Covenant technology. Now, this could be a gameplay thing, but when you play Halo Combat Evolved, you can pretty easily avoid Covenant projectiles. Plasma bolts are slow, they do a lot of damage, especially to unprotected flesh, but in a lot of ways they're very similar to blaster bolts. We see them ricochet off materials, and I have no doubt that plasma bolts could be stopped by lightsabers. That includes the plasma pistol, although maybe you want to avoid taking too many overcharged shots, and of course the plasma rifle. Now, I've kind of gone back and forth on the needler, but given how easy the needles explode, I think you could very easily swipe those out of the air with a lightsaber, or also destroy them outright. But again, Anakin as a smart combatant is used to being overwhelmed by enemies. I don't think elites will really present even any physical challenge to him. They're not going to be able to stand up to his lightsaber so long as he can get close. It's a little bit different than Master Chief. Chief can afford to take a lot more damage because of his regenerating energy shield, but he also doesn't have that one weapon that can kill an elite in a single swipe. When we talk about, say, the first level of Halo, the Pillar of Autumn, I think Anakin does very well. His skill set works well in tight spaces and small Covenant groups. His biggest danger is really just the type of damage that Chief routinely takes, but which for someone unshielded will really start to add up quickly. For example, if a plasma blows up in your vicinity, it might drain Chief's shields, but for Anakin, that could be game over. I do think that Anakin will be able to move through the first level relatively easily. I think he'll actually help at the end too. He'll probably try to take control of the lifeboat. Anakin would be, in my mind, easily the best pilot in the Halo universe when augmented by the Force, and I think he could definitely land the lifeboat without taking any casualties. And based on what we see, I think he would be eager to do so, and from that point on, he should be able to lead the Marines in rescuing other lifeboats and rendezvousing with the rest of the Marine contingent from the Pillar of Autumn. I mean, there are Marines that survive this whole ordeal. I don't think Anakin is going to have any major problems. Now, where he might suffer is if the Covenant were using more of their later weapons like we see in Halo 2 and Halo 3. I think Anakin might really struggle against something like a plasma sniper, which is difficult to defend against, but we don't see that in the game, and even in the secondary material, we don't learn a lot about Covenant using that sort of weapon during the events of the game. I think Anakin might be even better situated for leading the mission on the Truth and Reconciliation. Again, he doesn't have the same sort of defensive potential as Master Chief, but when combined with the Force, I think he'd be much more stealthy, and his lightsaber would actually help the team move through the capital ship without waiting for doors to open. And again, this is at the point too where in the game a lucky Marine could survive most of what happened. The most difficult moments for Anakin will be the full-scale warfare, especially if he sticks to his lightsaber. You can only deflect so many plasma bolts. I'm thinking, for example, of the moment when you have to wait outside of the gravity field in the Truth and Reconciliation. Really open spaces, they will not play to his strong suit. I also think that as the campaign goes on, one of the interesting aspects will be stamina. Now, Master Chief is used to fighting these non-stop wars. I'm not sure if Anakin is. Now, Halo CE does have some breaks for Master Chief within that you don't see in the game. For example, between Halo and the Truth and Reconciliation, he goes back to the Marines base and he has some downtime a little bit. In those moments, Anakin should be able to rejuvenate himself with the Force, but especially if he is using the Force continually as time goes on, I think he could start to wear down, which is a real concern. Anakin just isn't the same warrior that Chief is. He doesn't have the same stamina in my mind, even when augmented by the Force. Chief can afford to have a few little mistakes. He can take the occasional plasma shot. He can sit behind cover and fire away with his assault rifle. Anakin won't be able to do that. He'll go hand in hand with elites and grunts and jackals, some of whom, especially the elites, will have energy swords and will put up quite a fight. There is no individual warrior in the Covenant who can stand up to Anakin, and neither can Master Chief in my opinion. However, Anakin's real weakness is that he will be fighting a battle that frankly he's not trained for. Still, even through the Silent Cartographer and Assault on the Control Room, I think Anakin can survive. However, things should go differently for him than they did for Chief. I think Anakin is going to want to be much more of a leader, use his experience working with clones and his amazing defensive abilities with his lightsaber to help move as a squad through the missions. He'll undoubtedly want to rely more on stealth and take things slowly, and that may cost him, but I do think he has at least a chance of surviving until we get introduction of the Flood. And in my mind, this is where Anakin's luck runs out. There are a few things that are going to make the Flood difficult for Anakin to handle. First of all, although Anakin may learn how to use other weapons, his primary weapon is a lightsaber, and I think he's really going to struggle when he gets overwhelmed by the Flood, especially the little infection forms, which he'll have to baseball bat individually. Where Master Chief's armor protects his skin, a few flood tentacles could break their way through Anakin's defenses, and at that point, it's game over. And I mean, the same thing even happens to Chief, who's much better suited, literally, for this type of engagement. A flood finds their way to his neck seal, starts to wriggle a tentacle in, and only Cortana using an electric shock is able to save him. There is also the fact that Anakin will now be facing off against infected Marines who will have their UNSC weapons which should be very effective against a Jedi lightsaber user. In Star Wars, slug throwers can be effective against the lightsabers because even if the blade does manage to catch them, a little molten bit can go through and still hit the user. I can see something like a assault rifle having a similar effect, and of course a rocket launcher is going to be very difficult to stop. And of course, the Force does offer Anakin some tools that Chief didn't. He can use Force Push against wave of infection forms. He can try to take out the legs of some of the combat forms, but I just believe he's going to be overwhelmed. He doesn't have the stamina that Chief does, and he can't afford to make a single mistake. And when you're facing the flood with an electrical baseball bat, mistakes are going to happen. I do think of that one Marine that Master Chief encounters in the library and thinks about how tough of a son of a bitch that guy must have been for getting so far without Spartan training or armor. I do feel like that would be Anakin. Jedi become normal people when they're overwhelmed and when they can't use the Force, whether through a lack of concentration or energy, and at a certain point that's going to be Anakin. Although this isn't necessarily in the spirit of the video, we also do run into some technical issues too. For example, Cortana's not going to be able to use Anakin's non-existent Mjolnir suit to teleport across the ring in 2 betrayals and beyond, which is going to make things difficult. And I also think in the library that's so infected that Anakin may start to suffer from inhaling flood spores. As I mentioned too, I also think Anakin will be relying on Marines for these large-scale engagements, and by the time he gets to 343 Guilty Spark, he won't have backup, and these large-scale engagements get to be much more difficult. So, could Anakin win in Halo? No, not in Halo CE anyway. The odds are too great. Master Chief is just built different, and even Master Chief got extremely lucky. He probably shouldn't have made it through the events of Halo. His survival is miraculous enough. Anakin's is just, well, impossible. That's just my opinion though, guys. Let me know what you think. As always, down in the comments, I look forward to reading them all. Let me know if you've got any more of these versus videos or matchups you'd like to see me cover in the future. As always, thank you very much to Curiosity Stream for sponsoring. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.